Russia is still pushing for Pokrovsk. That comes as no surprise, as Vladimir Putin has wanted that city for years, and he launched an entire summer offensive designed to take it. The offensive failed, but Russia is still advancing, slowly but taking territory in the process. But that territory is coming at a high cost. The road to Russian success in Pokrovsk is being paved in the bodies of Putin's dead soldiers, and Ukraine is making sure that Russia suffers for every move it makes. Ukraine's brutal push at Pokrovsk is making Russia bleed for every inch. That's according to Euromaidan Press, which reported that Ukraine's forces have unleashed a series of counterattacks in the Pokrovsk region that are eliminating Russian troops by the dozens. Pockets of Russian soldiers are being isolated and taken out, Euromaidan Press claims, with the bulk of Ukraine's counteroffensive taking place near the key city of Dobropilya. In doing so, Ukraine has once again broken the encirclement of Pokrovsk that Russia was attempting to achieve, and it's done so by retaking villages surrounding the city and sending elite units into battle against Russia's overwhelming manpower. We start in Kucheriv Yar. On October 31st, United 24 media reported that both aviation and special forces of Ukraine's Defense Intelligence, or HUR, had launched a multi-layered airborne operation in and around the city of Pokrovsk. That operation has a simple purpose. HUR operatives would enter regions near Pokrovsk that Russia had already declared as captured so they could be retaken. By liberating these regions, the encirclement strategy that Russia is trying to use against Pokrovsk will be broken once more, ensuring Ukraine doesn't have to defend the city against assaults from all directions. Each of the districts that HUR would focus on is considered strategically important to Ukraine from a logistical perspective, with United 24 adding that several helicopters had already been involved in the operation. Even the head of Ukraine's military intelligence, Kirilo Budanov, would be involved, as he was traveling to the site of the operation to oversee everything that HUR had planned. That's all we knew at the end of October. During the first days of November, plenty more details emerged, and Kucheriv Yar lay at the center of the whole operation. The village had been under partial Russian occupation since mid-August, Forbes reported toward the end of October. By October 22nd, Ukraine was ready to launch its HUR-led operation, the details of which are only now emerging. Paratroopers from Ukraine's air assault forces landed in the village, breaking through the Russian lines in the process. Once there, they turned their attention to one of Putin's biggest targets, Ukraine's civilians. As of July 31st, 13,883 of those civilians had been killed by Russia's assaults, with a further 35,548 being injured, Statista reports. On October 22nd, 10 civilians were able to escape that fate. The air assault forces evacuated them while under fire from Russia's troops, eventually managing to coordinate their escapes using drones. With the civilians safely out of the picture, the air assault forces turned their attention back to the Russian soldiers. While full details of what the air assault forces pulled off are scant, we know for sure that Kucheriv Yar is officially liberated. Ukraine released drone footage showing around 50 Russian soldiers who were stationed in the village surrendering to Ukraine's troops. Forbes explains why this is so important to Ukraine. The recapture of Kucheriv Yar is vital for Ukraine's control of the region around the city of Dobropilya and is a major morale boost, the outlet reports. Further, this victory highlights a fundamental weakness in Russia's current offensive strategy, undermining its ability to hold captured territory. That last point is especially important. Putin will be scratching his head, asking himself how this has happened all over again. Throughout the summer, Russia took villages like Kucheriv Yar, only to lose them again in short order. Forbes highlights this, noting that Russia has adopted a similar attritional approach to the one it took earlier in the Ukraine war to inch its way closer to Pokrovsk. The first part of this approach tends to work. Russia throws soldier after soldier into the meat grinder, wearing down Ukraine's defenses until a gap is created in the lines. A handful of soldiers stream in, and that's where it all starts to go wrong for Russia. Those soldiers take up defensive positions with the goal of holding out until reinforcements arrive. The problem, from the Russian perspective, is that the small breakthroughs rarely include any armor. They're carried out by troops that are on foot or at best riding motorcycles into battle. All these soldiers succeed in doing is breaking through gaps in Ukraine's kill zones without neutralizing the kill zones themselves. Ukraine's drones continue to fly, the gaps get closed, and the Russian soldiers who achieve the breakthroughs end up trapped in isolated pockets from which there is no escape. As reinforcements fail to come and Ukraine cuts off the logistics that are supposed to keep the entrapped soldiers supplied with food and equipment, morale starts to break. A soldier can only fight for so long, and as hard as Putin wants them to fight, on an empty stomach and with no ammunition. Eventually, the troops in these isolated pockets break and Ukraine takes advantage. That's what it did to great effect in Kucheriv Yar. Its paratroopers dropped in and liberated the village within days. The HUR operatives didn't even have to kill most of the Russian soldiers, as the majority were ready to surrender as soon as they saw what was coming for them. Ukraine is using Russia's own tactic to break the collective spirit of the enemy. There is a flaw in Russia's strategy, and Putin seems unable to do anything to change it. Retaking Kucheriv Yar would have been a massive achievement on its own for the HUR operation. However, Ukraine had the wind in its sails and plenty of momentum, especially as so many of Russia's soldiers chose to surrender rather than fight. So Ukraine pushed on. With Kucheriv Yar liberated, Ukraine's forces pushed east to arrive at the village of Zatishok. Like Kucheriv Yar, that village had been held by Russia since August, the New Voice of Ukraine reports. Not anymore. Ukraine liberated it and kept on pushing. A third village named Shuketska has also been clawed back out of Russia's grasp, UNN reported on October 26th. Euromaidan press reports that Ukraine conducted a house-clearing operation that saw it sending ground-based assault troops to these villages. These troops were supported by both reconnaissance and strike drones, which helped HUR capture a further 7 Russian soldiers to add to the 50 or so taken into custody from Kucheriv Yar. But this time, Russia tried to fight back. Ukraine's general staff confirmed that 44 Russian soldiers were killed and a further 8 were wounded in Ukraine's push into the other 2 villages. Now the clearing operation continues. Though the liberation of these 3 villages represents a massive success for Ukraine, there is plenty more work to do. Euromaidan press points out that Ukraine can't rush in. If HUR becomes too emboldened by its success, it may find itself running into Russian soldiers in other pockets who are better supplied than expected. The Russians have expanded their use of drones to supply encircled troops from the sky, dropping small containers of food, ammunition, and medical supplies. Though insufficient for sustained combat, this has prolonged the survival of trapped units, Euromaidan press notes. Ukraine has to play the waiting game, and it strikes when Russia's troops are at their lowest. Ukraine has also been clever with the timing of its counterattacks, the same outlet reports. Rushing in creates the impression of a large and coordinated assault, Euromaidan press points out. Those types of assaults grab attention. They alert the Russian high command to what Ukraine is doing around Pokrovsk, which might prompt Russia to send even more soldiers to attempt to reinforce those stuck in the pocket. Instead, Ukraine allows the occupiers who make the breakthroughs to provide reports indicating that their positions are stable, only to rush them when the Russian high command is operating under false information. By the time any Russian commanders realize what's happening, Ukraine has retaken territory and has caused casualties that Russia never expected to experience. It's a very clever approach that forces Russian commanders to make snap decisions, leading to more losses. Ukraine is making Russia bleed for every inch it gains near Pokrovsk, all as Ukraine manages to retake some of the most important pieces of territory that Russia claimed during the summer offensive. And Russia's losses have been colossal near Pokrovsk. That's according to the Peaky Blinders unit of Ukraine's army, which is fighting tooth and nail against the Russian occupying forces in Pokrovsk. On November 2nd, that unit published a Telegram post in which it shared graphic aerial images of mangled and burned Russian soldiers littering the fields and streets where they had attempted to conduct assaults. Dozens of burnt or mutilated bodies of Russian soldiers lie in the open on the approaches to the city. Almost all of them were hit by drones, kamikaze drones, or Mavic airdrops, the unit declared in its post. For the sake of a few square kilometers, Russia puts thousands of its soldiers in charge, sending them to storm with just meat without any tactics or strategy. They are stupidly crushed with a large amount of meat. Russia is paying a heavy price for any gains it makes, the unit concludes. It's also paying the price while losing key villages to Ukrainian counterattacks, as we just saw thanks to HUR's late October operation. Let's talk numbers for a moment. When reporting on the Peaky Blinders unit's Telegram post on November 2nd, Euromaidan press reported that Ukraine's defense forces had managed to repel 36 of 38 Russian assaults on that day alone. The 2 successful assaults hadn't achieved much, whereas Ukraine's counterattacks allowed it to advance up to 0.4 kilometers, which is approximately 0.25 miles, in certain areas of the Pokrovsk front. So not only are Russia's assaults failing, but Ukraine is using the fact that Russia's assaults are so weak to advance. This is where snap decisions being made by Russia's local commanders in Pokrovsk come into play. As Euromaidan press puts it, local commanders desperate to save their careers sent several reinforcement attempts that only resulted in more massive losses. These localized decisions further weakened Russian cohesion and ensured Ukraine could dismantle the encircled formations methodically, one pocket at a time. That's the genius of Ukraine's strategy in Pokrovsk right now. With every village retaken, Ukraine forces Russia to recommit soldiers in directions where the country's commanders haven't accounted for. Why would they? The territory was captured, so they could send soldiers to other villages. At least that's what they would have thought until receiving word that Ukraine had liberated the territories Russia thought it had captured. Forced into trying to save face after losing territory they thought was safe, these commanders send weakened troops to reassault the reclaimed villages. Ukraine tears through these troops in no time, and the loss of those soldiers creates a domino effect elsewhere, as Russia's assaults on other villages are made weaker due to reduced manpower. That's how you get 36 out of 38 assaults failing. And it's also how you get massive Russian losses. We've already reported on the nearly 60 Russian soldiers surrendering and nearly the same amount being killed or injured in the retaking of Kucheriv Yar, Zatishok, and Shuketska. But this is just a small slice of the true scale of Russian losses around Pokrovsk. The casualty toll is massive. Ukraine's 1st Azov Corps, which was deployed in the Pokrovsk region toward the end of the summer after Russia had made substantial gains, reports that Russia lost 1,226 soldiers during 1 week alone in its area of responsibility. Those personnel losses were added to the 23 armored vehicles, 130 other vehicles, 226 drones, and 39 artillery systems. This is attrition. But not in the way that Putin expected. Those weekly numbers seem unrealistic. We only need to take a wider look at Russia's fortunes in the Pokrovsk region in 2025 to see how accurate they really are. Writing for his Trench Arc column on October 6th, military reporter David Axe noted that Russia had lost 100,000 soldiers to death or injury during the 2025 push for Pokrovsk alone. Axe also points to captured Russian documents that highlight the scale of Putin's meat grinder approach throughout Ukraine during this year. According to captured Russian documents, nearly 87,000 Russian troops died between January and September this year as Russia's wider war in Ukraine ground toward its 5th year. Another 160,000 were wounded, many badly, and 34,000 went missing, most of whom are probably dead, Axe reports. Add all of those numbers up, and you get around 30,000 Russian casualties per month. That amounts to around 1,000 per day, which is right in line with the 1st Azov Corps' claims. When we say that Russia is paying for every inch of territory that it takes in Ukraine with blood, this is what we mean. Pokrovsk was supposed to have been captured by the end of the summer. That was one of Putin's main goals for the summer offensive. Yet the city still stands. Plus, as we saw toward the end of October, Ukraine is retaking settlements that Russia intended to use as launch pads for a multi-directional assault on Pokrovsk, which means a job that was meant to be done by the end of summer is at risk of not being completed in 2025 at all. That will sting Putin. He knows, though it's debatable whether or not he cares, that the Russian military is bleeding far more heavily in Pokrovsk than he ever intended. However, some water has to be poured on the Ukrainian flame here. What HUR achieved in Kucheriv Yar and elsewhere with its airborne operation was remarkable, and it put a severe dent in Russia's plans to assault Pokrovsk. But reclaiming those villages doesn't mean that Russia is going to give up on Pokrovsk anytime soon. Putin keeps on pushing because he knows just how important Pokrovsk is to Ukraine, both logistically in the Donetsk region and symbolically as one of that region's most important fortress cities. Putin is angry that his forces haven't taken Pokrovsk yet. He has raged at his country's forces, demanding that they take Pokrovsk by the middle of November. That's according to the Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, which noted that Russia is unlikely to achieve that goal, just as it has failed to take Pokrovsk the many other times that Putin has imposed an arbitrary deadline on the fall of the city. Putin regularly tasks the Russian general staff with seizing operationally significant swathes of land within unrealistic timeframes, and the timeframe within which Putin aims to seize Pokrovsk is not a realistic reflection of Russian forces' ability to seize the town, the ISW says. Still, the fact that the demand has been made at all tells Ukraine that it can't become complacent. Russia is still coming for Pokrovsk, and despite Ukraine's many successes, it's making progress at a snail's pace. Euromaidan Press points out that Russia still hasn't achieved the encirclement of Pokrovsk as of November 2nd. That's thanks in large part to the types of operations that HUR conducted in late October. However, intense fighting continues in the regions surrounding the city, and Russia is sticking with its strategy of sending small assault groups to create narrow gaps in Ukraine's defenses. The approach is starting to work, the BBC reported on October 28th. It says that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed that Russian forces have managed to establish a small foothold in Pokrovsk itself. That doesn't mean Pokrovsk is on the verge of falling. This foothold is likely similar to those we've seen elsewhere, meaning Russia's forces in the city have probably already been isolated. Still, the fact that Russian soldiers are in Pokrovsk at all highlights that Putin still has one major card that he is convinced will see Russia claim victory in Pokrovsk, a massive manpower advantage. Zelensky has confirmed that Russia is currently operating with an 8-to-1 manpower advantage in Pokrovsk, and that Ukraine can't hope to match Russia in sheer numbers. Around 200 Russian soldiers are inside Pokrovsk right now, Ukraine's president reveals, But Ukraine has eyes on those soldiers. Its drones have identified their positions. Russia likely can't do much more than this in Pokrovsk until it achieves its other objective of encircling the city. An assault from one direction can be controlled and contained by Ukraine, even when Russia has a manpower advantage. But assaults from multiple directions are much harder to contain, which is why special forces groups from HUR and the 1st Azov Corps are working so hard to retake the small settlements that Russia manages to occupy. The Guardian notes that Ukraine is well aware of how important its special forces are to the defense of Pokrovsk. On November 2nd, the outlet reported that Ukraine has deployed more of its special forces to the city. Those forces are operating in consolidated groups, the Ukrainian military's commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrsky, says. And for now, we are holding Pokrovsk, he adds. The question is, for how long? On October 31st, the Kyiv Independent reported that Zelensky believes there are now 170,000 Russian soldiers deployed in the Pokrovsk direction. That's 60,000 more than the 110,000 that Russia deployed during the start of the summer offensive that was supposed to take the city by the end of August. This higher number demonstrates both the manpower advantage Russia holds over Ukraine in Pokrovsk and the sheer amount of damage that Ukraine has managed to do to Putin's forces throughout 2025. Putin's solution to the Pokrovsk problem is to pour more meat into the grinder. Russia's strategy may yet work. An 8-to-1 manpower disadvantage will wear away on Ukraine's defenses, but until Pokrovsk falls, Ukraine will continue to make brutal pushes that are costing so many Russian lives in the city's surrounding regions. The best Putin can hope for now is a Pyrrhic victory in Pokrovsk, as Russia will have lost over 100,000 of its soldiers in less than a year to claim the city. Putin isn't helping himself in this war of attrition. As tens of thousands of Russia's soldiers become casualties in Pokrovsk, many more are being killed by Russia itself. There's a mutiny in the Russian army, and it's led to Russian soldiers being executed for daring to defy Putin. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of what's happening in the Pokrovsk direction. And thank you as always for watching.